Welcome back to a sort of young person's guide to prog rock. I am your host, Ian Prize, and I am back with Ryan Robison.
Hello, Ian. It's good to be back.
It's good to have you back, and B. Ryan Gann. Hello, Brian.
G'day, Ian. Good to see you.
Good to see you, too. So, we just left King Crimson with Lark's Tongue in Aspic. And also leaving King Crimson was Jamie Muir, their percussionist, who rode off into the sunset to become a Buddhist monk in Scotland. But King Crimson themselves would get back to the stage for their semi-live Starless and Bible Black. So this album was recorded live and then edited/overdubbed to sound a little bit studio-y. But here we are, the second of our King Crimson mid-70s trilogy. Does anyone have any first thoughts about Starless and the Bible Black?
Maybe Ian, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what semi-live really means, though, because that's really not something you see anymore ever.
Well, that's actually an interesting point. So semi-live, this version of King Crimson, as we said, Jamie Muir, their erstwhile percussionist, really brought a very, very, very heavy improvisational ethos to the band for this. And I think it was the magic sauce that both Robert Fripp and Bill Bruford, the drummer, were craving. And this whole era is really interesting because for the whole, basically 2 years this is going on, they're trialing out and iterating through a lot of the songs that will go on to the albums. Starless and the Bible Black is just a very raw version of this. So this is obviously the midpoint of this. And I think Lark's Tongue, they probably still felt like, well, we need to go in and make a studio. I feel like Starless is just, the mics are hot, we've got a really great take of some of these songs, or we've just trialed it out on tour half a second ago. We'll just record it, and if the recording was clean, we can maybe add some overdubs, we can mix it correctly. But anyways, all of this to say a lot of these songs are literally recorded live on the road, or just tested on the road and kind of brought in their raw, bleeding forms. And that's what you're experiencing in this album.
It's super interesting that you point out that these are not road-tested songs. These are just road songs. And, you think of things like Dark Side of the Moon, right, which had extensive touring before they ever hit the studio, right? They really got a chance to test their material. It's what would that have been like if they had decided to take this route and just in the words of a famous anchor, F it, we'll do it live.
No, I think it's just two different types of music. And, I think it is very much apples and oranges in that sense, where I do think Pink Floyd, obviously specifically Dark Side of the Moon, is a composed piece. It's beautiful. It has an A and a B and a C. And the finished product, well, it does sound great live. The finished product is also packaged with the amazing production and stuff. This album specifically is a jazz freakout. And not just jazz, they put in a lot of hard rockin', classical, whatever. They put in other styles, but the ethos is just, we turned on the mics and we went to town. I can't imagine a studio version of this album, off the top of my head.
Yeah, what would a producer have done with our very first track here, which I know we're going to talk about?
Well, and I was going to say, I think the one final thing I would say about that is none of this is to say, this isn't a bootleg. This is a beautiful album in its own right, and we'll talk about it more in Red, but one of the things that King Crimson really does have, and this probably does come from playing live quite a bit, they have an amazing ability to orchestrate with just the four of them. So Robert Fripp on guitar, Bill Bruford on drums, John Wetton on bass and vocals, and David Cross on violin and keyboards. And you can hear that they fill the space with just those four. They don't need studio bells and whistles. They fill every, inch of this vinyl with crimson-y magic.
And that's a good point you make, too, that it's absolutely not a bootleg, not to be confused with the super low-fi downloading Dave Matthews bootlegs off Napster or Kazaa in the early 2000s. It's a little higher quality than that.
No, and this is they've obviously mic'd up all the instruments And as I say, they also went back and did overdubs and stuff. This is not, yeah, as you say, like one microphone out in the crowd. This is a beautiful album in its way.
Or yeah, I guess in modern parlance, the tool holding up the iPad in the concert and filming it all.
Yeah. Oh dear.
If you're one of those people, let the hate mail come in. It's fine.
Ryan's ready for you. He's got his own iPad. You can duel. Brian, do you have any first thoughts about this album, or do you want to kick it off?
Just because you can jazz doesn't mean you should. For our listeners, I can't quite explain my love of prog rock despite my general dislike of jazz. They seem to contradict themselves, but typically the jazzier prog gets, the more I typically struggle.
Yeah.
If there's a jazzometer, which in the audio medium of the podcasting world, we can't obviously show our listeners, but this would be cranking it up.
But Brian is holding up a device he has been working on.
Yes, this is all the R&D, all of your Patreon bucks have been going into
the jazzometer.
Yeah, to creating this instrument.
Just so Brian can say he hates songs.
It's just this little caricature of Miles Davis, right? He floats back and forth.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
It's very crude and mostly cardboard, but it took Brian a lot of time.
We're all very impressed, Brian. His little science project. No, but I see what you're saying, and I think that is a very fair take on this. And then I guess the one final thing I will say before we kick off the album here, I do think that Robert Fripp and crew actually really captured a kind of jazzy aesthetic. And obviously not, as you say, like a 1959 Miles Davis jazzy aesthetic, but I think they absolutely captured raw improvisation. And the virtuosity, though it's a lot of musical information to take in, the virtuosity on display over these three albums is just insane. And, specifically, obviously, you can listen to Robert Fripp do his thing, but listening to Bill Bruford really go to town, and Jamie Muir cracked him open, and he's playing the whole drum kit like annoying percussion. But as in, like, he's playing the whole drum kit as if he could play every single part of the drum kit all the time, using everything. Like the carcass of a buffalo, he wastes not a scrap. So
I'm with Brian. I can empathize, right? Because even though I personally like this album, right, when something gets that direction, I can just hear the pretentious douchebag out there saying like, "Oh, this album's very challenging," and the second I hear that, I just go,
"Uh-oh,
we're in for." We're in for an earache.
A rougher ride.
So I completely understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. So to soothe your gentle ears, we will start our journey on this album with Great Deceiver. So this is right out the gates exactly why King Crimson is hard. I don't know what to make of this song because there are riffs, there's a chorus, but it's really hard to hold on to these songs. Like there's, like the tempo and whatnot shifts so hard between verse, chorus, and introduction that, it doesn't just have a nice normal build. And I think that's why it's really hard to grasp these types of songs. So the addition of their lyricist, Richard Palmer James, I think is a real boon to this whole era. We'll get into the lyrics of this song in a hot second, but I love the lyrics. I guess one other point I would make about the music before we kick it off lyrically, John Wetton's voice really grounds them. And I was like, Lord Almighty, they could have gone off a cliff, but they needed a really powerful, kind of just, dare I say, bland voice. Like, it's an earthy voice. There's not too much texture to it. It's just he can deliver the songs. And he can go hard and he can go soft. Like, there's something for everyone there.
Well, Ian, you make a good point, because when you think about later in his career, he goes on to be a founding member of Asia at this point, and it fits in very well with that super smooth, slick 80s sound. But here it also somehow works with all these jazz nerds playing in this club, and It's surprisingly versatile.
Yeah, and I was going to say, as I say, I think it brings it out of the tumbling off of a cliff kind of jazz ether and makes them rock songs. And I was like, if you played this with a really straight beat, it would be a rock song.
But it's not. The cliff was there too, right? Not to be overly critical, but like I think about where they were with like Gordon Haskell taking vocals for a little while, and oh boy, yeah.
But actually, I was going to say, I think the thing that makes this era of King Crimson shine is I think they truly go for it in a way that the previous two albums, which we have not talked about on this podcast series, but Island and Lizard, the thing they don't have is they're kind of all like the second half of Moonchild. They're more just aimless noodling. This one, there's dynamics and there's intensity and there's heaviness and all that sort of stuff. I think the whole band stepped up to such a degree. So we come down to the lyrics of Great Deceiver. So in plain speak, The Great Deceiver is basically just a song about the devil, as far as I understand. El Diablo. There just seems to be many a reference to temptations of the modern world and the sacred and the profane living together side by side. Apparently, the chorus, Cigarettes, Ice Cream, Figurines of the Virgin Mary, was based off of Robert Fripp seeing these items in Rome, in the Vatican. And he was like, ha, 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 how crazy it is that the profane and the earthly and the sacred all live together in some, I don't know what it's called in Italian, but a tienda somewhere in Italy.
Well, see, I was thinking it was actually at the Vatican gift shop, and I'm trying to imagine what it was like before I was born. There's cigarettes in the Vatican gift shop. Times change.
I mean, yeah, times do change. But yeah, and then I think the other thing they kind of touch on in this song is there's actually a lot more about the modern world. He drops a little F-bomb in there, which, as we know from British English circa 1970s, it is not a slur, in fact. It is, oddly enough, again, in British English, it is a type of meatball.
Oh.
Health food. Oh. Wait,
Health
so is
food
this
meatball.
like an early reference to tofurkey?
Yes, no, and I think that's what he's kind of like talking about the weirdness of the modern age is like, isn't that crazy that there is, yeah, I mean, that is it. Like, isn't it weird that they're doing like healthy versions of kind of gross British cuisine? I genuinely think this was a thing going on in the early 70s. It was the first blush of health food. So it would have been like on the tips of, certainly especially these young hip people, it would have been on the tips of the tongue. The first kind of blush of mainstream vegetarianism, stuff like supplements, whatever, will have been starting in the 70s. Anyways, that's them laughing about it. Or that's them commenting on it. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think you had an experience with this song at one point.
Oh, yeah. So this was wild. Just randomly, I was in like a normal coffee shop somewhere in Seattle, and the music was completely nondescript. It was no joke the kind of like 2012, like Fleet Foxes or something like that. Just like, it was whatever that indie was of that era. Then this song came on. And then it went back to just the 2012 like indie music. And I was thinking to myself, I've thought ever since deeply about this. I wonder what that shuffling algorithm was, because I don't know what, this might have even been they had like their personal iTunes or whatever.
I mean, it's a big swing to start this album. I think what's interesting about the themes, to your point, Ian, if this is about the devil, about Satan, I'm not even quite sure what they're trying to say. I see the juxtaposition of the holy and the unholy, but when we're talking about Cadillacs and blue jeans, this is where maybe my metaphors are getting a little muddled. Like, is Cadillac good? Sorry, is Cadillac bad? Blue jeans good?
You have muddled your metaphors. Yeah. Yeah. No. But actually, yes, you make a very valid point, and I would then say, unlike, say, Pink Floyd, where he says, this is money, and it is the root of all evil today, or this is us and them, and this is why it's not good to have us and them. I actually think what's interesting about this song, and about his lyrics more generally, is they're really impressionistic. So he's just saying, here's the unholy and the holy smashed together. Ain't that kind of crazy? I think it would be almost I don't know, like, Rorschach from The Watchmen. But look at the city and all of its evil and stuff. I just smell the sin coming out of the gutters of the city or whatever. But all of this to say, I think that's kind of the impressionistic, like, look at the modern world we're living in. Cadillacs are good, circa 1972 if you can buy one. But also, is it bad to be flashy and prideful and what? I don't know. Like, I think there's a lot of that type of stuff going on there.
But what about blue jeans? Maybe I'm overthinking it, but are blue jeans like an American import into Britain at this point? Like, wouldn't blue jeans be considered very American in this era?
That is an interesting question. Well, I actually wonder if maybe the point is, because this is the, bell-bottom girl from Derek and the Dominoes is around this time. This is a verbal signal of youth. And I'm sure the old people, certainly in Britain, were still like, oh my God, we wear trousers in this household. And that blue jean is maybe less a symbol of America per se, but American youth culture bleeding into Britain. Not even really making a comment about it, just saying, you guys still talk to us because we wear our blue jeans and we wear our hair long, which was another constant theme of the 70s. Marvin Gaye talking about what's going on. You guys keep mentioning that our hair is long.
I kind of like the ambiguity, though, right? There is no moral judgment about any of it. It's just observational.
Yeah, absolutely. So we go from Impressionism to the Dutch Renaissance with Night Watch.
Ian, I thought you said this album was jarring.
So Night Watch is probably my favorite King Crimson song of this era, and I'm going to throw it down. Might be one of my favorite prog songs ever. I love everything about this. So the very first thing, the melody is just kind of this mantra, that do-do-do-do-do-do-do, just like this really simple pentatonic kind of thing. And it means that the song can flow around that kind of melody. The main melody is not some jarring angular riff. It's just a really, really, really simple pentatonic thing, and then the band colors in beautifully around the melody. And the song just flows forward and forward and forward. But the real star of the show to me is the lyrics. So this song is about Rembrandt's The Night Watch, which shows members of a city night watch, and this kind of night watch culture I'll get into in a second, but it was the product of the peace in the Dutch Netherlands after the Spanish Wars. So, you're all prog fans, so you should already know what the 80 Years' War was. But just in case you don't, does one of you want to tell me about it?
I would actually recommend listeners track down one of Rick Wakeman's more obscure musicals. He did a 4-disc opera on the 80 Years' War. So.
And it explains all of it non-verbally. So you should get the main beats through the various instruments. So the 80 Years' War, essentially the Habsburgs, who owned some insane, territories all over the goddamn place because they're the Habsburgs, owned, obviously, Spain, owned Austria, I guess, and then randomly owned a grumpy Protestant burgeoning republic up in what is now the Netherlands. So the Netherlands and the Spanish authorities go to town on each other for 80 years, and basically the top part, what is now the Netherlands, gains their independence after the Spanish Wars, and this ushers in a period of middle-class prosperity, which is what the song's about, or what the painting is about, and the song's about the painting. So the other thing going on in the Dutchlands is obviously the Protestant Reformation had happened, so the churches no longer commissioned big oil paintings, and now the new prosperous mercantile class, the great men of the Netherlands, could commission these paintings instead of monarchs and churches, so they're about normal scenes. And one of the normal scenes is the night watches. So night watches used to be, back in the Spanish Wars, literally that, a night watch where you would patrol the city with a bunch of city guards and that was all fun. But in a time of peace, they function basically as kind of civic organizations / gentlemen's clubs. And something fun to do on a rainy Saturday afternoon is look up these portraits, because this is a whole genre of paintings, the Night Watch scenes. They all commission these kind of groovy portraits of basically, Dutch lads circa 1600 in their boys' club or whatever. And that's what this is. But of course, they hire Rembrandt, one of the most talented, famous painters of his age. So this isn't just like some random, 5 guys getting their portrait painted. This is a dynamic and powerful scene.
And to be clear to our listeners, the song isn't about the subject of the painting. The song is about the painting, Night Watch.
That is a really, really interesting point. And I was going to say, I think it's he's picking out details in the painting, and I think the bookends is like, shine, shine, the light of good work shine. He's like in the gallery looking at the painting. But I'm going to drop you down one more meta layer. Within the song, he's talking about the art coming from society now. Like, now we have time to produce all this groovy art. So he's also talking about the painting being a product, an artistic product of the time that it's representing. I think I just broke my own brain. I'm snake eating my own tail here. But yeah, no, fantastic song, and every line in this, again, for my very esoteric delight in this song, every single line is kind of obviously visual, but quotable in its way. And then I think the other thing on a personal level, and the Flemish Tourism Board, please let me come do my pictures of an exhibition around your fine region. But this is like one of my favorite eras of painting. And yeah, I think that this song puts into words maybe a lot of the things I love about this style of artwork. And it almost like, good artistic criticism, it gives you a verbiage to speak about it. But I love this style, so like Dutch Golden Age, and I love the Flemish Renaissance a little bit earlier. And, this is the Bruegels with their kind of like village scenes, etc. And obviously this with the civic scenes, Vermeer with the intimate kind of studio scenes. There is a earthiness, that's not the mythology and the religious iconography of the Italian Renaissance. This is very much like Dutch and Flemish village life. Let me come to your country.
You were banned from the Netherlands. Is that right, Ian?
Oh, yeah. No, I was banned from the Netherlands. I was trying to reclaim it for the Habsburgs. Oh, dear. But yeah, so this is, again, a very interesting layer to this album, where obviously Robert Fripp is trying to both annoy us, but sometimes comes up with these really kind of beautiful, dare I say, gentle, easy to listen to songs. So
my feeling on his guitar playing there, I know the guitar is a string instrument, but in this song, it feels like it is truly a string instrument. And it's kind of a unique style of playing you don't hear in some of their other songs or even with other artists at all. But I think folks might know what I mean when I say that. It's truly a string instrument in this song.
I was going to say, I think 2 points there is his kind of playing technique. Literally what he does with his hands is so good that sometimes he's shredding like we would understand with like a doodle-doodle-doo kind of shredding. This one, he's using beautiful violin swells with like a volume pedal or something. And then also plucking that kind of harmonic pling, pling, pling. And, again, he's using every part of the instrument. He has an amazing guitar range. And I think that, again, is something that's really special about this era, is you get to hear everything Robert Fripp can do with a guitar.
That's what you get when you practice for 23 hours a day.
Like a nerd, you become a well-respected guitarist. How dare you? So, probably Robert Fripp's biggest guitar tour de force on this album, maybe even this whole era, Fracture. So, I think of King Crimson as Endless Noodlers. That is the place they occupy in my memory. And of course, these songs are harmonically pretty weird. Again, they were going down that Eastern European classical music route. But this song, Fracture, has peaks and troughs like a normal song. And I don't know, there's obviously this level of noodling that they do have. But obviously, all of these songs have been worked out on stage. You know, as we alluded to at the top, they have actually been touring these songs. They aren't just, 22-year-olds in a studio getting to play for 8 minutes. And so I think the song has an amazing dynamicism. I might even say it's a King Crimson signature song, but the one thing I'll say about it is there's moments where I think Led Zeppelin could have taken any of these riffs and made them into songs. They are rocking in like a pretty traditional sense.
Well, I think it's funny because this is improv driven. This song does feel composed, and it's probably because they just got to do it this many times on stage or however many months that was. The first time I heard you make that Led Zeppelin comparison, now I can't unhear it, even though obviously the guitar work, that's not that I love Jimmy Page, but that's far beyond his ken, and almost impossible to play, which we can talk about in a minute. But that, that rhythm section, in this case, it's John Wetton and Bill Bruford, but I feel like they could have jammed with JPJ and John Bonham, that kind of that stomping, bluesy, like you said, it could be a rock song if it really wanted to, if you took a little piece out and wrote the rest of a Zeppelin song around it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wasn't aware of the reputation of Fracture until preparing for today's episode. Obviously, I'd listened to the song, but to a non-musician like me, the virtuosity behind this song, I would say, is not readily apparent. For those unaware, I mean, this is generally considered one of the most difficult songs to play on the guitar, period. But I think when, especially a non-musician thinks of a very difficult song, it's going to be some gigantic, grandiose guitar solo or, classical gas or something.
Yeah.
But this is like a professor's guitar solo. It's not that it's a bad song, but I think it's difficult for a layman to appreciate its depth.
Yeah, and I guess this comes back to what I was saying about the Led Zeppelin point. I think if you took any of the riffs and then just continued the riff into a chord progression, then continued that chord progression into a song, I think you could appreciate each riff individually. I think all of the bits played one after another and on top of each other, and with Robert Fripp noodling away on them. Again, it's a lot of musical information. And I think you have to sit down and study it in a sense to really be like, oh yeah, that was good. Oh, that was also good. And I do think, as I've always said, riffs are all about the context they're in. And I think it's like trying to appreciate a movie when someone's yelling in your ear or something, where it doesn't matter how good the main event was. There was a lot of other stuff going on. And I could see how this era more generally is kind of like that. I think this song then is actually really nice to re-listen to, and I very much enjoyed re-listening to some of the, shall we say, more challenging tracks on these 3 albums, because I think it's the...
Oh no, there's that word again.
It comes back, my friend. Yeah, I think it's the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th listen. You're like, oh my god, I can hear what he's doing, and I'm now, as with a good riff, excited for this part to come up, and kind of like an optical illusion or something. You can start seeing the giraffe through the dots or whatever.
Yeah, and that those moments, at least when you can predict them later, they're better because the song's climax there towards the end. I love that. I think you should make sure it's turned up loud enough to scare you, but I actually love that part as long as you know it's coming. Yeah. But Brian, you were talking about in preparation for today. Are you referring to Failure to Fracture?
I think we've got to talk about Failure to Fracture.
Talk to me about Failure to Fracture.
So Failure to Fracture, I believe, began as a blog that eventually became like a YouTube series and then a book by a gentleman named Anthony Garone, who, when he was a teenager, his father challenged him to learn to play Fracture, and he spent literally nearly 20 years trying to do so. And then eventually went to a intensive guitar course in Mexico led by Robert Fripp to learn how to play this song. And I think it took him 22 years to finally learn how to play Fracture. And if I may, there's in the description of the book he's since published, I want to just quickly read one piece. So this is when he committed to going to rural Mexico in a course led by Fripp. And I quote, "It was in Mexico that Garone learned the mechanics of Fripp's unique right-hand technique. To properly play Fracture, Garone had to relearn to play guitar, sit, stand, and breathe. It required meditation and a new way of using his body."
There we go.
For everyone that thinks they are good at guitar, and I obviously cannot play any instrument, try to play Fracture. It sounds like it's a path to madness to learn how to play this song.
I was gonna say that is really selling. Like, anybody wanna listen to this song yet? It's really selling it.
And Robert Fripp has commented on this. He was actually quite complimentary to Mr. Garone's journey to learn to play the song. So check it out. Obviously, there's quite a few different media pieces. You can read different blog posts and blurbs, or get the book. It is out of stock on Amazon, but I'm sure you can track it down.
Well, I was going to say, that actually reminds me to plug your book, Loser to Kazoozer. You tried to learn Fracture on the kazoo.
How long is this kazoo? Like, I'm imagining, like, I'm like...
It's a normal kazoo. Oh my God.
Fabulous. But yes, also that is a very, I mean, he's making my point there about, like, I think that Robert Fripp really lives, breathes, and sleeps and eats guitar. Like, I think he is using every single bit. And, to be so in tune with your instrument, this is a very organic kind of soundscape. Like, he doesn't sound like he's pretending to rock. It sounds like he's just exploding, music out of his guitar at a rate of knots.
It's true, yeah. He actually attempted to play it on a recorder once, and the recorder caught fire.
Why do they play this on a plastic instrument? So before we leave, interestingly, I was reading Yes on Track, the book from the On Track series, where they talk about every single song every artist has ever recorded. And the Yes one, by Stephen Lamb, says, and I'm paraphrasing here, "One can't help but feel if King Crimson had done Tales from Topographic Oceans, they'd have been lauded for it." So we talked about Tales from Topographic Oceans last week, but that actually brought up an interesting point. So he's saying King Crimson had done Tales from Topographic Oceans, a famously bloated, extensive, some say masterpiece, some say bloated, extensive, 4-part ridiculous journey. What does the role of expectation play in the enjoyment of music?
I think it's such a massive role. You could spend multiple episodes talking about that and all of the examples through history, which, like, oh, there were these expectations for this album from this, like, it's everything.
So maybe the way I would answer this question is, I think it's, what we expect from an artist, and there's only a handful of artists that can truly just, the true chameleons. So, like, I think maybe David Bowie might be the only one where he genuinely touched on, like, 8,000 genres. Maybe Queen might be another one. But for most artists, within their kind of works, within their artistic whatever, you subconsciously, or maybe fully consciously, really want each album to be kind of like the other one, but new enough to want to listen to it. So these 3 albums, actually, you could probably mix up the tracks, and the super connoisseurs might be able to tell you which specific 6-month period each song comes from. But I think in general, like, it's a pretty broad, continuous artistic spectrum, but with each song being interesting enough to warrant existing, basically. One other point I might also make about this is, I think, we've been talking about King Crimson like they're fully free jazz, and maybe live they were, but actually, I am going to defend them to the hilt, kind of, that within each song, they do a pretty normal introduce a musical idea, and they will, for some of their more concise, coherent songs, reintroduce that idea at the end. And I'm talking like a riff or something. Doesn't matter all the freaky jazz happening in the middle. They will bring it back at the end. So you have this, expectation in music. You want there to be that sense of full completeness. And I will say their songs have a pretty good dynamic in that regard. So anyways, I guess to wrap that all up, I have no idea about King Crimson literally doing Tales from Topographic Oceans. However, yeah, they got me thinking about the role of expectation in the enjoyment of music. Okay, so that's where we will leave this album today, but join us tomorrow for the final part of the trilogy, Red. We'll see you then.